You don't expect a war to start with a bucket of water. But that's exactly how mine did. It was early spring when I found the cement. The morning sun hadn't even cleared the pine trees behind my house, and I was already ankle-deep in dew, walking barefoot toward the old stone well that had been in my family for generations. The same well my great-grandfather dug by hand in 1929, the one that had never once gone dry. The one I'd been quietly maintaining ever since the HOA decided sprinklers were more important than history. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No drip. No echo. I dropped my galvanized bucket down like always, but instead of the usual soft splash, I heard a dull, cold thud. Confused, I peered over the mossy rim and saw what should never have been there. Cement. Solid, gray, unforgiving cement. Poured right to the brim and smoothed over like a fresh grave. At first, I thought it had to be a prank. A cruel, costly one. But then I spotted the laminated notice zip tied to my garden fence, already curling at the edges from the damp air. It read, "Per unanimous HOA vote, your obsolete and unesthetic open well has been permanently sealed in the interest of neighborhood safety and visual harmony. All inquiries should be directed to the HOA board." Below that, in thick block letters, was the signature of Karen Delaney, President, Oak Meadow Hills Homeowners Association. Karen. Of course it was Karen. Karen, with her pearls, her pastel polos, and her pathological need to micromanage every mailbox and mailbox flower arrangement within a 3-block radius. Karen, who once fined a neighbor for using a hummingbird feeder she claimed was visually cluttering the airspace. I should have seen it coming. She'd asked about the well before. Made comments about how it was such an eyesore, how open water attracts pests, and how it doesn't align with our community brand. I'd told her the truth, that the well wasn't just functional, it was historical. That my great-grandfather's hand-dug water source predated this HOA by decades, and that I had full, legal water rights, documented in property records so old they were handwritten. Apparently, she didn't care. Or worse, she knew and did it anyway. I stood there for a long time, fists clenched, heart pounding, trying not to scream. Because what Karen didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the well didn't just serve me. It wasn't just my water. It was the water. The primary source for the underground system that fed this entire neighborhood. Karen thought she was erasing an eyesore. What she did was declare war on her own water supply. Within 48 hours, things started going sideways. First, the Greenwood sprinkler system began sputtering, then it stopped altogether. Next, the Millers' toilets wouldn't flush, and their youngest daughter reported brown gunk coming out of the guest bath faucet. By day 3, the community pool had to be drained due to contamination, and the HOA's own irrigation contractor posted an urgent notice recommending residents limit outdoor watering indefinitely. Panic was simmering. Confusion reigned. And me? I stayed silent. I didn't run to the board. I didn't shout, "I told you so." I just waited. Because I knew the truth, and I had something stronger than Karen's petty power trips. Leverage. You see, unlike the HOA, I'd done my homework. The water rights attached to my property were not just ceremonial, they were binding. Ironclad. Recorded in the original land grant and tied to the aquifer below. Without my well, without my access point, every lawn, flower bed, and flushing toilet in Oak Meadow Hills was living on borrowed time. And now, Karen had sealed that access shut with cement. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd detonated it. What followed would unravel the fabric of our pristine, picket-fenced paradise. Neighbors turning on each other. A secret lawsuit. Hidden HOA spending. A viral video that would change everything. But that's all still to come. For now, all you need to know is this: the war began with water. And by the time I was finished, Karen Delaney would wish she'd never poured that first bucket of cement. The first phone call came from the HOA secretary, a woman named Martha who usually sounded like she was hosting a bake sale. But that morning, her voice trembled over the line like the last leaf in a storm. "Hi, this is Martha Jenkins. From the HOA. Karen wanted me to reach out and, ask if you'd noticed anything unusual with your well. She said it might have sealed improperly. Sealed improperly. That's what she called it. I stared out my kitchen window at the slab of concrete that now capped my family's legacy like a tombstone and bit down the urge to laugh. Nope, I said smoothly, haven't noticed a thing. Right, Martha replied, clearly unsure how to respond. Well, Karen just wanted to make sure everything was, aligned with community standards. And if you have any questions, she's happy to meet. I bet she is. That was the first crack. The second came in the form of a text message from my neighbor, Glenn. Glenn was a father of 3, the kind of guy who grilled every Saturday and had never once questioned the HOA. But now, he was desperate. Hey, man, weird cue. Do you still have water pressure at your place? Our pressure tank's acting up. Plumber says it's not our system. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked down to my basement utility room and flipped the lever on the pressure gauge. The needle stayed steady. I still had water. They didn't. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into accusations. Residents started questioning Karen's sudden safety initiative. A few had even begun digging into the bylaws, some for the first time in their lives, and were shocked to find that nowhere, absolutely nowhere, was the HOA authorized to permanently alter or destroy privately owned utility systems. Especially not ones tied to shared infrastructure. On Friday, I received a certified letter from a lawyer representing the HOA. It was so hilariously panicked I read it twice just for fun. Due to unforeseen consequences regarding the recent preservation efforts, the HOA formally requests your cooperation in reactivating your private well system to restore balance to Oak Meadow Hill's underground water access. They called it a preservation effort. I called it sabotage. And they were asking for help. From me. The very next day, I did what any self-respecting homeowner would do when the HOA begged for mercy. I posted a TikTok. It started with a slow zoom on the well, now sealed with cement and tagged with bright red spray paint, property of HOA. Then I cut to a series of quick clips, empty sprinkler heads spitting air, brown toilet water gurgling in Glenn's bathroom, Karen furiously pointing at a clipboard while a group of angry residents surrounded her at the clubhouse. The caption read, "When the HOA destroys your well for aesthetics, and forgets the entire neighborhood runs on it. Hashtag cemented mistake hashtag well. It got 1.2 million views in the first 24 hours. And that was before the news picked it up. By Monday morning, our local CBS affiliate had a camera crew parked outside my house. The anchor leaned into the frame with a smile that barely masked her glee. This sleepy suburb may be facing a full-blown water crisis, because someone decided this well was too ugly for the HOA. But now? It's the HOA itself that's in hot water. Karen tried to hold a press conference. It did not go well. Between angry residents shouting about their utility bills and a plumber who pulled out blueprints showing exactly how the community's irrigation system was tied to my property's groundwater feed, Karen looked like she was melting faster than the ice in her oversized Diet Coke. Then came the moment that truly shifted everything. I stepped up to the microphone. "I didn't ask for this fight," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But when someone tries to bury your family's legacy in cement and then lies about it, when they endanger the health and stability of an entire community to preserve their idea of beauty, it stops being about rules. It starts being about accountability." That clip aired during the evening news. By Wednesday, the HOA board was in full retreat. Emails leaked. Text messages were screenshotted. Turns out Karen had orchestrated the cement job with no vote, no contractor license, and zero legal authority. Worse still, she'd used HOA funds to pay for it. Thousands of dollars diverted from maintenance budgets and pooled into what she called aesthetic restoration. And suddenly, the community wanted blood. But I wasn't finished. Because while Karen was scrambling to save face, I was preparing something far more devastating than a public shaming. A legal maneuver that would freeze the HOA's operations and put every one of their contracts under review, including their water service provider. You see, I'd quietly consulted with a water rights attorney. And what we found was shocking. The original land use agreement, signed decades before Oak Meadow Hills ever became a development, gave my property, and only my property, the controlling right of access to the aquifer beneath us. Not just for personal use. For neighborhood use. And if those rights were interfered with, I had every legal standing to revoke access. Which is exactly what I was about to do. I didn't slam the legal packet down on the HOA office table, though I wanted to. Instead, I set it there gently, let the weight of it speak for itself. The man across from me, Roger Carr, the HOA's recently hired attorney, looked at the cover page, read the words Notice of Rights Revocation, and blanched visibly. "We're hoping to avoid litigation," he said, voice tight. "Too late for hope," I replied. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then said, "I assume you're aware this could destabilize community services." "That's your problem," I said. "Karen made it mine first." The document made it crystal clear, as the holder of the primary well and underground access rights, originally established before the subdivision even broke ground, I had the authority to suspend shared access in the event of sabotage, contamination, or illegal interference. Guess what category cement fills? Karen tried to play innocent. She stood in front of the emergency board meeting in her lemon yellow blazer, clutching her clipboard like a shield, and insisted it had all been a gross miscommunication. She said the well was unlicensed. She said she'd assumed the structure was ornamental. She said she was deeply saddened by the misunderstanding. But the emails proved otherwise. Screenshots from her private messages to the board showed her bragging about finally getting rid of that medieval mudhole. One line in particular sealed her fate. "He thinks he's special because his great-grandpappy dug a hole. Well, now it's a flower bed." That clip got posted, too. Overnight, Karen wasn't just the villain of our neighborhood, she was the face of HOA overreach on the entire internet. People from all over started sharing horror stories in the comments. My HOA fined me for having a pink garden gnome. I hope Karen gets hit with every drought fee in existence. This man is a hero. Take back the water. Karen cemented her own downfall. Literal queen behavior from the homeowner. And with every like, share, and stitch, I got closer to my goal. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about leverage. By the end of the week, I had what I needed, over 70 notarized statements from neighbors, people who were once silent, scared, or indifferent. Now, they were furious. I walked house to house with a clipboard of my own, not asking for money or lawsuits. Just truth. Do you think the HOA should be allowed to unilaterally destroy property? Do you support the right to safe, legal water access? Do you believe Karen Delaney should be removed from office? Everyone signed. Even Martha Jenkins. Especially Martha Jenkins. I filed the revocation notice Friday morning, just after sunrise. The clerk at the county records office raised her eyebrows as she read the contents, then looked at me and said, "You really pulling the plug?" I just nodded. At noon, the switch flipped, literally. The HOA's water service provider, upon receiving official documentation, initiated a hold on their contract pending review. They could no longer legally draw from the aquifer connected to my property. Within hours, the pressure tanks ran dry. Residents turned on faucets to find nothing. Karen emerged from her colonial-style fortress of a home around 1:30 p.m., clutching a mug, hair half done, visibly sweating. I stood on the sidewalk sipping iced tea as she stomped toward me. "This is insane," she shouted. "You're holding the neighborhood hostage." "No," I said, calmly. "You did that when you buried my rights under cement." "We'll sue," she spat. "Already filed," I replied, nodding toward the courthouse 3 blocks away. "And with the community behind me." She glared, but the fire was gone from her eyes. The HOA board had already started discussing her removal. The vice president, usually her loyal lapdog, had emailed me privately the night before. If you take her down, I won't stand in your way. She's been out of control for months. The very next day, Karen's reign collapsed. The special vote passed with 94% approval. She was stripped of her title. Her husband filed for separation. Turns out, her financial decisions extended far beyond HOA mismanagement. Even her beloved Community Garden Restoration Committee voted her out. And as for the well? That took some work. I had to hire a demolition crew, a hydrologist, and 2 permit specialists. But 3 weeks later, the cement was gone. The wellhead was restored, reinforced, and protected under a new steel enclosure with a lock. And a sign. Private historical resource. Do not tamper. Trespassers will lose access to running water. Neighbors came to thank me. They brought cookies, home-brewed beer, and handwritten cards. Glenn even offered to install security cameras at his own expense. The final piece of karma came in the form of a leaked email. Karen, in a desperate bid to salvage her reputation, applied for a job in another HOA. They turned her down. Because someone had forwarded them the TikTok. And the legal case. And the water shutoff story. Turns out, when you cement over the past, you don't just lose access to water. You lose the right to call yourself a leader. 3 months passed. The grass turned gold in the heat wave, and the HOA tried to pretend everything was fine. The new board president, Thomas Rowe, was a retired accountant with the charisma of cold oatmeal but a decent head on his shoulders. He brought muffins to the first meeting, which felt less like a bribe and more like a peace offering. "We're resetting," he'd said. "Trying to rebuild trust." I nodded politely, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not after what Karen had done. Not after how close she'd come to destroying everything just to preserve the view. Karen disappeared for a while. Her house was listed for sale, then taken off the market. She hadn't been seen at the grocery store or the post office. Rumors swirled. Someone said she'd moved to her sister's place in South Carolina. Someone else swore they saw her in line at the DMV, hair dyed jet black, wearing oversized sunglasses like she was in witness protection. I didn't care where she went. I just hoped it was far. But Karen Delaney wasn't the type to disappear quietly. She returned in late August, 2 days before the HOA's first official audit. I saw her at dusk, stepping out of a silver Prius and walking straight into her front door like she'd never left. No fanfare. No apology. Just that same tight posture, shoulders squared like the world owed her another chance. I watched from across the street, pruning my hydrangeas. She didn't look at me, but she knew I was there. The next morning, a flyer appeared in every mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. It wasn't signed. But everyone knew who wrote it. Oak Meadow deserves strong leadership again. Those who destroyed our infrastructure should be held accountable, not praised. Ask yourself, is your water truly safe? Or just convenient? The gall. The sheer, unbelievable gall. Karen wasn't just back. She was running a shadow campaign. It started with whisper campaigns. Isn't it strange how he waited until summer to fix the well? What if he planned the whole thing for attention? Don't forget, he shut off water to kids' homes. Then came the door-to-door visits. Karen, armed with her charm offensive, knocked on doors offering truth packets that painted herself as a misunderstood reformer. She claimed she'd been misled by incomplete information and that I had exaggerated his claims for internet fame. One neighbor, a timid guy named Bill who worked nights, said she stood on his porch for 20 minutes reading aloud from HOA bylaws. She just kept saying, "I was trying to protect property values," he told me. Like it was a mantra. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. Because while Karen was out there gaslighting history, the audit results were brewing behind closed doors. And when they landed, boom. $32,000. That's how much Karen had diverted from HOA reserve funds during her term. Most of it was unaccounted for. Some went to the illegal well cement job. The rest? Traced to personal expenses labeled as community enhancements. spa visits, custom signage, a wine subscription labeled hospitality stock. And then came the kicker. She'd tried to prepay her own property taxes, with HOA funds. Once the audit went public, the neighborhood turned ice cold. People crossed the street to avoid her. One neighbor posted a sign on their lawn, "A well-deserved exit, by Karen." The board scheduled a community meeting, not just to share the audit results, but to allow residents to ask questions. Karen showed up anyway. She sat in the back row, silent, wearing all beige and sipping from a thermos like this was just another town hall. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. But I could see her foot tapping. Waiting. When the Q&A began, a woman I'd never seen before stood up and asked the question we'd all been avoiding. What's being done about the money she stole? The room tensed. President Rowe cleared his throat. We've begun proceedings to recover funds through small claims court. We're also pursuing criminal fraud charges with the county. And that's when Karen stood. Calmly. Like she'd been rehearsing it. There was no theft, she said. Only misallocation during a time of crisis. If I had waited for permission to act, we would have lost the entire season. Our curb appeal would have tanked. She turned toward me. And as for the well? I stand by what I did. He could have warned us. He could have shared. Instead, he weaponized water. Gasps. Rowe tried to speak, but I beat him to it. I stood slowly, holding out my phone, and played the recording. It was from her original voicemail to the board. The one where she said, "Don't worry, once the cement sets, he can whine to whatever ancestors he wants. This HOA needs a clean look." Silence. Then a single neighbor clapped. Then two. Then the whole room. Karen's face flushed crimson. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, but not before muttering something that chilled me more than I expected. This isn't over. For a while, it felt like the storm had passed. Karen stopped attending meetings. She didn't speak at the mailbox. Her yard went unkempt. The HOA fines, now rightfully targeting her for once, piled up on her porch like snowdrifts of poetic justice. But if I've learned anything in this war of lawns and lies, it's this: Karen Delaney doesn't disappear. She retreats. She recalibrates. And then she reinvents herself. It started with a new name on the community group chat, KD Consulting. At first, no one thought much of it. Just another board retiree offering landscape tips and decor harmony suggestions. She used phrases like property cohesion and architectural spirit alignment. But the tone, was unmistakable. One day, she posted a 12-slide visual audit of community paint colors, naming certain homes as aesthetic outliers. Another day, she offered to volunteer her time reviewing yard layouts for a small advisory fee. And people started listening. Some didn't even realize it was her. Others did, and didn't care. They missed the tyranny. They missed the order. It wasn't long before she was holding unofficial walkthroughs with a clipboard again, this time under the guise of private consultation. I confronted her in the cul-de-sac. "You're not on the board," I said flatly. She smiled like a shark at a buffet. "No. But I am a resident. And some of us still care about standards. Standards don't come with invoices." She blinked, pretending innocence. "If someone values my insight, I don't see the harm." I shook my head. "You're conning people into hiring the person who nearly destroyed their water system." She stepped closer, voice low. "You can't bury me with concrete, sweetheart." I already learned that lesson. The conversation ended there. But my sense of unease didn't. A week later, strange things began happening. Violation notices, ones that didn't come from the board, started appearing on doors. Handwritten. Color-coded. No signatures. At first, people assumed they were a prank. But then, 2 families actually paid the recommended donation amounts listed at the bottom of each notice. One neighbor, a sweet woman named Lisa, said, "It's just easier than dealing with a second fight. If it keeps her from bothering me." I knew then it was time to act. This wasn't just HOA territory anymore. This was fraud. Impersonation. Extortion. So I started documenting everything, again. Screenshots. Photos. Audio from residents. One clip, from an older man named Bill, was especially damning. She said if I didn't align my garden shed with her guidelines, she'd raise awareness about my tax delinquency. Bill wasn't delinquent. I checked. But Karen had scared him anyway. The final straw came when she attempted to hold a private planning assembly at the clubhouse, booked under her niece's name. She put up signs. She passed out flyers. She told people she was advising the HOA off record. And she almost pulled it off. Until I showed up. And brought a camera crew. A local podcast that had followed our well debacle returned for a follow-up piece. I handed them a packet of evidence. They filmed the whole assembly as it fell apart. When confronted on camera, Karen stammered about community pride and informal influence. But the footage spoke for itself. Within 24 hours, the county issued her a cease and desist order for unauthorized community business practices. 2 days later, a new sign went up in the clubhouse window. No solicitation. No private governance. No Karen. And just like that, she was exiled, again. This time not by a vote. But by a neighborhood that finally saw through the pastel blazers and potted threats. Fall crept in slowly. Oak Meadow Hills transformed from a sunburnt battlefield into something almost peaceful. Leaves changed. Kids returned to school. Halloween decorations bloomed like strange, smiling fungi across the lawns. And the well, my well, stood quiet and strong beneath its new protective cap, humming gently with the kind of power only old things possess. We thought it was over. But Karen always saved her biggest performance for the finale. It began with a package on my porch. No return address. Wrapped in brown paper. I opened it slowly, expecting glitter, or maybe a dead fish. What I found instead was a stack of legal documents, photocopies of the original land grant, annotated in red pen, with certain phrases underlined over and over. One note read, "All water rights shall revert if structure abandoned." Another, "Use it or lose it clause, loophole." And a third, "New ownership equals opportunity." She wasn't done. She was coming for the well. Somehow, despite the cease and desist, despite being removed from power, despite losing every shred of credibility, Karen had filed a petition with the county land board to reclaim communal rights to unmaintained infrastructure. Her argument? The well had been inactive for a sufficient period, thus qualifying it for public reassignment. She claimed the HOA had a renewed water stewardship committee prepared to oversee its use. She even submitted a proposal with diagrams showing a gazebo and meditation bench around the well. A gazebo. The hearing was scheduled for November 3rd. I showed up in a black jacket, folder in hand, and a small brass bucket, the original one my great-grandfather used. It still had the faded initials carved into the wood handle, EL, 1930. Karen arrived in lavender, lips pinched like she'd been sucking lemons since August. She came alone. But I didn't. Behind me stood nearly half the neighborhood. People who'd once feared her now wore pins shaped like water drops. My neighbor's teenage daughter had made them with a 3D printer. The judge listened patiently to both arguments. Karen spoke with rehearsed sweetness. I spoke with facts. With legacy. With witness statements and videos and a letter from the Historical Preservation Society. And then I handed the judge the bucket. This, I said, voice clear, was used to water the very trees that line this courtroom. That well has never been abandoned. It's been attacked. But not abandoned. He ruled in my favor. Unanimously. Karen didn't wait for the verdict to finish. She stood, turned, and walked out, no clipboard, no speech, no last word. Just the sound of her heels tapping across the floor like the final clicks of a failing metronome. She sold her house 2 weeks later. Rumor is she moved to Arizona, joined a yoga retreat that prohibits any kind of leadership structure. If true, it's the most peaceful act of irony I could ever imagine. As for Oak Meadow Hills, we've changed. The HOA is still here, but it's quieter. Humble. The board is run by people who understand that power isn't meant to punish, it's meant to preserve. The well remains protected by ordinance now, registered as a historical and ecological resource. And every spring, we gather around it. Not to worship, but to remember. To tell our kids the story. Of how one bucket of water unearthed a flood of truth. Of how cement cracked beneath the weight of legacy. Of how Karen Delaney tried to bury something deeper than stone, and ended up washing herself away. Because you can seal a well, but you can't erase what it remembers. And this one? This one remembers everything.